All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue on here. Have you ever heard the term Indian giver? It was an old saying that people used to say in the United States, which basically means that you give something to somebody and then you decide you want it back, so you take it back. It's the mark of a dishonest person, okay? Well, the term Indian giver does not refer to the Indians. It actually refers to the way the Indians were treated by the federal government. We gave them lots of land, and then the government took it back. Okay, so here's a few examples of that are covered in Helen Hunt Jackson's A Century of Dishonor. So in 1834, the government made the entire Great Plains a reservation, a place where the Indians could live. They gave it all to them. Now the reason why is because the Great Plains has a problem. It has no trees. So very few trees. Without trees, without lumber, you cannot build massive cities. You cannot build railroads through there. Well, as time went on and technology progressed, and more importantly, as the railroad progressed out west, we actually got to a point where we could ship the lumber out there. And also gold was discovered in the northern Great Plains in South Dakota and North Dakota and other places like that. So the government changed its mind. In 1850, the government changed its mind and set up tribal boundaries. So we took away millions of acres of land from them and then gave them back worse land. We gave them back what we considered to be useless. So in other words, the federal government were a bunch of Indian givers here. All right, the Cheyenne tribe were given a barren region in Colorado and they raided for food. So they told the Cheyenne, here's your reservation, you stay on this little plot of land. But there was hardly any crops that could be grown here. There was hardly any animals. The water was no good. It was tainted by mineral deposits and things like that that made it undrinkable. So how would you like it if somebody told you have to stay home and nobody's going to bring you food and you have to survive off of what's there? Well, if you're feeding your children, you're probably not going to stay there and just let them starve. So the Cheyenne go out and they start raiding white settlements. The militia forced them back on their reservation. They made them go back there. And well, while the Cheyenne were raiding, to be honest, y'all, it's not all America's fault, okay? Not all, at all, okay? The Cheyenne, whenever they raided for food, they didn't just show up and get food and then leave. They killed people, they raped women, they did all kinds of stuff while they were there. So Colonel John Chivington was told by the governor, I want no peace until the Indians have suffered more. It's not good enough just to drive them back to their land. He wanted them to pay for what they had done. So we have one of the most brutal things in American history that the country should kind of be ashamed of. But anyway, it's called the Sand Creek Massacre. This happens in 1864 in Colorado. And what ends up happening is all the men in the village had ridden away. They went on a hunting party or a raiding party trying to find food. But what was left was the women, the children, and the old folks. So the U.S. Cavalry comes in with John Chivington at its head, and they ride into the Indian village and they massacre the women and the children. They were actually playing sick games with the bodies, and not all of them, not every single one of them, but some of the soldiers, there were accounts saying that they were playing a game called Catch the Baby on the Bayonet, which a bayonet is a knife that sticks off of your rifle about this far. And what they were doing is they were taking these Indian babies by the leg and they would chuck them up in the air, and the other soldiers would sit there and just try to catch them, make a game out of it, okay? Well, after the women and children and the old people were dead, they take their horses and their men and they hide in the teepees and they wait. They wait for the men to return. The Indian men, the Cheyenne men come back not realizing that the U.S. Army is sitting in their teepees with the bodies of their dead families. And as soon as the warriors came back, they basically got ambushed by the U.S. government, okay? So it was a dark day in American history. Now, even though that's true, I still think that there's been many dark days in our history, but still this is the best country on earth, okay? By far. And things like this do not happen anymore. We have changed, and that's a great thing, okay? All right, let's move on to the next thing. All right. So one of the big Indian heroes is a man named Crazy Horse, okay? Crazy Horse is right here. He is a famous Sioux war chief, okay? And he killed several men in his career. In South Dakota, I'm sure you all are familiar with Mount Rushmore, okay? Mount Rushmore has the faces of 4 of our greatest presidents on it. But about 7 miles away from that, in those same hills, the Black Hills of South Dakota, they are right now building a monument to Crazy Horse. The Native Americans said that if you have your great chiefs on our mountain, we want our great chief on our mountain. So this is called the Crazy Horse Memorial. It is in the process of being built right now. It probably won't be finished for another 50 years or so. It is massive. It is way bigger than Mount Rushmore, okay? The head right here of Crazy Horse stands over 100 feet tall. And if you looked at the entire sculpture of Mount Rushmore, it would probably fit, and I'm talking about everything, all this stuff too, you know, the torso. It would probably fit just in this area. So if you ever go to South Dakota, you're at Mount Rushmore, don't forget about the Crazy Horse Memorial. It is absolutely free to go in and see it, just like Mount Rushmore is, as long as you have a National Park Pass, okay? It's a great place to go, and there are many other attractions right there next to it, okay? So how did Crazy Horse get to be the great chief? Well, let's talk about that, okay? Now, the way Indian names work is their names are based on attributes, okay? In other words, what are you like? Well, let's call you what you're like. So somebody named Crazy Horse, they named him that because he's very quick, but he's also crazy in battle, okay? He's a very good warrior. So we have something called the Fetterman Massacre that happened next, okay? So what happened was the U.S. Army had gone on to the Sioux Reservation, and they were trying to guard a path through there to make sure that goods could get from one community to another. Well, Crazy Horse saw that as an invasion of his territory. So what he did is he went out there. There was a fort that Captain Fetterman had built, okay? And there was a long sloping field out to a gully that looked like this, okay, a rocky gully, where when you're in the fort, you can't actually see what's in the gully, all right? So what ended up happening is Crazy Horse sent one man out, one lone Indian with a bow and arrow. And it's bright and early in the morning, and this Indian goes up to the fort and he stays kind of out of range, and he starts hooping and hollering and yelling and dancing and taunting the people in the fort, these U.S. soldiers. And they find it amusing. But then this one Indian takes a bow and arrow and shoots the arrow into the fort. So Captain Fetterman has had enough. We're gonna chase this guy down. So all the cavalry mounts up, they ride out of the fort down this sloping hill, and once they chase this Native American into this gully here, they realize that they made a gigantic mistake, because Crazy Horse and all of his men are waiting at the bottom of the gully to ambush Captain Fetterman and his men. They basically killed everybody, okay? Crazy Horse did. You will find that the Indian Wars are a series of revenges, basically. We do something to them, they get angry, they do something to us, like the Fetterman Massacre, and we go back and back and back and forth. And that lasts all the way until about 1890, okay, when the Wild West ends. So, all right, so let's see, the Treaty of 1868, over Sitting Bull, the medicine man's objection, the Sioux agreed to live on their reservation in return for guaranteed supplies. Okay, so they got tired, the Sioux got tired of fighting the Americans got tired of fighting the Sioux. So in 1868, they make a treaty. They say, all right, if the Sioux lives on their reservation and don't come off and don't raid our villages and cities, what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring, the US government will bring buffalo meat to the Sioux, okay? Sounds like a good deal. Stay home, you get meat brought to you, right? But in order to understand this story, I have to back up to the Civil War. The Civil War had ended 3 years earlier, 1865. Now, during the war, there was a guy on the Great Plains who used to supply buffalo meat to the Union Army, the Northern Army. And he would go out and kill dozens of buffalo, and he would smoke the meat and shove them into big whiskey barrels, you know, the huge ones, and they would salt the meat to preserve it. And they'd ship that out to the Union Army. In 1865, whenever the Civil War ended, what ended up happening here is this guy says, okay, and he contacts Washington, D.C. and says, listen, I got 30 barrels of buffalo meat. When am I going to get paid for this? And they basically said, eat it, because we're not paying you. The war is over. So this guy's had 30 barrels of buffalo meat sitting in barrels for 3 years, and it was unrefrigerated. I'm sure you understand where I'm going with this. So when this Treaty of 1868 gets signed and they promised them buffalo meat, somebody in Washington said, hey, you remember that guy that used to supply buffalo meat for us during the Civil War? I bet you he would be willing to be up for that again, you know? So they telegraphed him with a telegraph machine, and they said, would you supply the buffalo meat to the Indians? And the guy who had gotten taken advantage of by the US government said, sure, of course I will. Guess which meat he sent him? It wasn't fresh buffalo meat. It was 3-year-old unrefrigerated buffalo meat in wooden containers. Now, naturally, when the Indians open this up and see this black, stinking, disgusting goop that's in these barrels that are leaking all over the place, they thought, again, that the US government had betrayed them. But in reality, it wasn't the US government's fault this time. Not directly. It was the fault of this buffalo hunter. But try to tell that to the Indians, right? So, guess what happened? They go to war again, okay? Anyway. So there you go. Go ahead and copy the rest of this right here. Graft, which is fraud in politics, and corruption. Indians were cheated with rotten buffalo meat. That is highlighted. You need to know that for the test. You need to know the story that I just told you. All right. So, let's see. We'll go ahead and end it right there, okay?